Today, I want to talk to you about the release because it's such an important part of the golf swing and it's so misunderstood by so many golfers. And if you're trying to work on the release, this video is going to be so important because there's a very good chance that what you're trying to do is incorrect. We're going to fix that. We are specifically looking at the irons, but you can take this to driver as well. So let's look at what you might have seen if you've looked at your golf swing and you've slowed it down and you've seen that really uncomfortable looking impact position, and you might be struggling with your irons, you might be thinning it, fatting it, struggling with distance, struggling with trajectory or maybe consistency. Well, what you might have seen is that really sort of common impact like this, where the handle gets delivered back behind the golf ball. We get the left wrist is kind of buckled at this point, the right wrist is very flat, and you've looked at that and you're going to say to yourself, I know that doesn't look right, that looks uncomfortable, and I know that's something I need to work on. Well, if we look at those wrist positions, it's this. It's left wrist is buckled, right wrist is extended like this. Well, I'm about to completely blow your mind and maybe change your whole thought about release. Have a look on the screen at the moment. We've got Adam Scott here, we've got Victor Hovland, and I've got two other golfers. I don't even know who they are yet. I'm going to pick another two, but it doesn't really matter who I pick, we're going to see the same thing. Look at what their wrists are doing. They are in exactly the same position as what we just demonstrated. Left wrist is very bent, right wrist is very arched. What's the difference? Well, when in the golf swing it's happening. Obviously, we just demonstrated down at impact. Those golfers are doing it much, much later in the golf swing. But what is the message? Well, the message here is that if your wrists have this look to them, that isn't wrong. That's not the wrong thing for your wrist to do. The key thing is the timing wasn't quite right. And that's what we're going to work on at the moment. So if you're someone who is actively trying to keep the club head back behind your hands all the way through impact, that's wrong. Because that's not what the best players are doing. The best players are actively encouraging the club to release past their hands and having this left wrist go into this cup position. Now, how do they do that and still strike the ball well? Well, that's what we're going to kind of go through in this little video. This is the first drill I want you to do, and this is great because you can do this without a golf ball. You don't need to be at a drive range. You can do this anywhere where you've got some space. I want you to take your setup, and I want you to put the club into this sort of parallel to the ground position. The key thing here, and we'll come to why this is important in a moment, is the club face I want to be pointing slightly down towards the ground. Okay, again, we'll come to why that is important in a moment. And then from here, without any backswing, so I'm just going to start from this position, I want to try and put as much speed in the club head as I can and go through the golf ball. So what would that look like? No backswing, put as much speed as I can in that club head and go through. Now, where do you notice the club is at this point? Well, the butt end of the club points down at the ground, and my left wrist is incredibly bent. And I felt like I could put a fair bit of speed into that. That wouldn't really feel the same if I tried to do this. Look at my left wrist. I've kept it really flat. I've kept my right wrist really bent. The butt of the club points up behind me. This might look great, but there's no speed in the club head. And it's no good achieving this great impact position with a shaft length forward and the left wrist flat if you're robbing yourself of 30, 40 yards. That's just not going to work. So try that little exercise. Face down, no backswing, and go through. Butt of the club is down at the ground, left wrist is cupped. Now, if we look at what that left wrist is doing, it's going from a position here which is slightly arched, which is really important, and it's going through to a position which we said is kind of very bent. That is a massive source of power for you. Massive. I've said this before in the video, but imagine if you were throwing a frisbee. Your wrist would go from this very arched position and it would go to this very, very cupped position. It's a great source of power. So if we go to that delivery position again that we spoke about, and if I have the face pointing up towards the sky, which many of you will have, what does that do to my left wrist? Well, it puts it in a cupped position. So if it's in a cupped position, I've lost that power. I've lost that ability to go from arched to cupped, I've lost this speed in my golf swing. That's impossible to play great golf from there. So if your wrist is cupped at this point in the way down, you're always going to struggle because you're not going to have the ability to put as much speed in the club head. So that first little exercise is really important, that we go face down, speed, okay? Now there's another element here which is really important, okay? My chest. Watch what happens if I put myself in that position here and I try and apply that speed to the club, but I don't have any chest rotation. At this point, you can see my chest is sort of pointed back behind the golf ball a little bit. So if I put myself here and just use my wrist to put the speed in, what's going to happen? Yes, I'm going to get that reference point that we spoke about, but we get this poor looking impact. So the key is putting the speed in with the hands at the same time as you're turning the body. Because then what we get is the club arriving at this beautiful impact position with the hands forward, the wrist pretty flat, but the key thing is, it's in the process of doing that. The chest turning through the golf ball was key. So let me go ahead and do one like that, and then we're going to go through the second drill, which is going to help you kind of knit all this together. So we're going to go face down. Okay, no backswing, which is incredibly hard. Instinctively, you always want to sort of take the club away. But, let's get myself reset again. Face down, and my job is to put as much speed as I can in the club head. And have a look at where I finished. Butt of the club is pointing down at the ground. Left wrist, if I move it a little higher, is incredibly cupped. That's our first little exercise. Our second exercise is actually something to do with the arms, because we have to get the wrists and the arms working well together. What many of you will find is that your wrists have this kind of look, which we've said is absolutely fine, but your left elbow is in this position post-impact. Notice how my elbows are further apart. My left elbow points up towards the sky, and there's going to be, unfortunately, so many of you watching this who go, Chris, that looks exactly like me through the impact. And you probably feel it. It probably feels a little bit uncomfortable. It feels cramped. It feels like the arms are close to you, and it really doesn't feel like you're nice and extended. So what is the difference there? Why is that left elbow doing that? Well, it's all to do with bend or fold. Take your left arm and just place it down near the golf ball. Think about where the back of your elbow points. It kind of points sort of almost back towards my golf bag. This would be an arm which is bending. My elbow points kind of up towards that tall tree behind me. Look where my palm faces, sort of back away from the target. This would be an arm which is folding. So I've still got bend in the arm, 90 degrees or so, but the elbow's pointing more down towards my hip. That's what the great players are doing. Now, because they've got speed, that arm is generally more extended, but it's in that same position. So look at the difference here between a follow-through position where my wrist is bent, which is fine. My right wrist is flat, which is fine, but that probably doesn't look quite right. Why? Because my left elbow is out of position. Watch what happens if I move my arm into a good position. Suddenly we get something now which is a lot closer to what we want. And just have a look at the club head here. Look how much further the club head goes when I move my arm from this position to this position. Club head goes further. So if the club head is traveling further, it's going to have more speed. So here's our second drill. I'm going to take this alignment stick cover, and essentially you're going to put it as high as you can underneath your lead arm. And what I've now got is a contact point or a reference point between my lead arm and my body, and that's really, really important. So as I take a setup here, put the club in position, if I go through to that sort of good checkpoint that we've just used previously, adding lots of speed in the club, lots of turn, then I've got this contact point. This is putting my lead arm in a fantastic position. Okay, there's my end position. Elbow is down, wrist is extended, the shot was good, the release was good. And where did I hit the ground? Target side of the ball. So where are my hands? In front. But the key thing is that I wasn't trying to keep them in front.